how do we move towards more positive, open, more enlightened mental states. This is the third week of exploring what's known as the 5 spiritual faculties of Buddhism. So in the first week, we explored the spiritual faculty of Shraddha, which can be translated as faith. And from a Buddhist perspective, faith doesn't equate to blind faith or blindly following an authority outside. There's an emotional component, but also reason is very important in Buddhist faith, and testing things against your experience. And that builds up confidence, so that's another translation for Shraddha, or faith. And then last week we looked at the second spiritual faculty of Buddhism, which is virya, which is often translated as energy, and often as energy for the good. And we looked at the different ways energy can get out of balance last week, and also how the four types of efforts we can make in the spiritual life. I don't know if anyone who was here last week can remember what those were. 4 spiritual efforts. So, well, I won't put.
Yeah, maybe. Is it like not conjuring up, but creating like a peaceful state of mind or a happy state of mind?
Yeah. So that's cultivating. So we're cultivating positive mental states. That's right.
And then maintaining positive
very
mental
good.
state.
Yeah. So that's the maintaining. So very, very important quality. Sort of in practice, cultivating and maintaining. And then there's an effort we make with negative mental states that come up. Preventing. So just seeing them coming around the corner or down the hill, and taking steps to prevent, and then when they've come up, which they inevitably do, how do we contain it or move on from it? One of the words is eradicate. This week we're looking at mindfulness, but I'll just mention the 2 other spiritual faculties, which will be in the next 2 weeks. So there's also concentration. So the ability to concentrate, particularly in meditation, is seen as an important faculty in Buddhism in practice. And then the last one is wisdom. So, one thing about these spiritual faculties, the 4 of them, is that there's this, it's easy to get them out of balance. So last week we looked at how energy can get, really restless or sluggish. So energy is it's an important part in making effort, but it's balanced with the spiritual faculty of concentration. So being able to ground the energy in meditation. And meditation can get over self-focused, quite absorbed, and that's where it's balanced by energy. So looking at an outward energy, and faith can get, I guess a little too blinkered or narrow and blind. Sort of bordering on this kind of blind faith, and it needs to be balanced by wisdom, and wisdom can get a bit dry and cognitive, so the emotional aspect of faith helps to balance it. But tonight, looking at mindfulness is kind of in the middle and connects all of them, and mindfulness never gets out of balance. So another thing I wanted to say about these faculties is the word in Buddhism, often these words are hard to translate, but it's indiriya, and that can mean strength. So these are things we cultivate to strengthen ourselves, but it also can be translated as controlling factors, which is kind of an odd thing too, kind of an odd concept. But when you think of the other translation of Indriya, which is, it's translated as the 5 physical senses. And when you think about our 5 senses, and how they can kind of control us. I don't know if you've ever had that sense that, what we see, if we like it, we get really drawn into it. If we don't like it, we're kind of caught up in aversion. And that happens with the other senses. So on the physical level, we can be quite controlled by our senses. And you could almost see these 5 faculties as a type of more spiritual sense, but unlike our physical senses, which are quite vivid and strong, the spiritual senses are quite embryonic in us, and we need to reflect on them. And the Buddha, you could say these faculties are a type of map that the Buddha has given us to have milestones and anchors to help us find our way out of being, just at the mercy of our emotions and our emotional response to our senses. So the Buddha was very practical in his teaching. I mean, what he said about his teaching is, I teach the truth of suffering, of the human conditioning, and the way out of that suffering. And his teaching was on a very practical level. So he gave us things like these spiritual faculties to reflect on as a way to find a map, how to hold ourselves with it. And he said when we're freed of suffering and we find liberation, it's partly because these faculties are present. So, as I said, mindfulness is in a particular category of its own, and with these faculties. And I know mindfulness is really just everywhere now in the West, which is really great. You just find it everywhere. But it's kind of easy to kind of find it even a little boring, because everywhere you go, you find hundreds of books about it, and courses and podcasts about mindfulness, and it's very, very valuable. But it has it's really quite an essential part of holding our spiritual life, and it has many layers of meaning from a Buddhist perspective. So the word is sati, which can be translated as clear knowing, but I also really particularly like this translation of it's recollecting. So it's, we go off what we want in life or what our values are, and with mindfulness we come back, we recollect again and again, and when we're looking from a Buddhist perspective, underlying all this is, as we were talking about with the efforts, how do we move towards more positive, open, more enlightened mental states? And mindfulness is what helps us discern, what's going on, that what we're caught up in is not getting us anywhere, that we're getting bogged down, and that we need maybe to step back. I think mindfulness also just gives us the sense of space. I think we're caught up in lots of objects and things out in the world, and when we step back, we have I think Tasha and I will talk about a breathing space, and just bring attention, wise attention to what's going on, and mindful of it. We start building up space around what makes us narrow and kind of going inward. And I find that in my life, like life can be a bit overwhelming, like I've been practicing as a Buddhist for a long time, and have done many different practices and meditated for a long time. But, life, living out in the world, what I guess Buddhists would call the worldly winds, these things that are enticing us and telling us we're going to live happily ever after, things that are impermanent and really can't really fit the bill, but we get caught up in those things. We're caught up in old strategies to escape suffering. We could sort of lose track of where we're going and clarity. And for me personally, I just find this sense of mindfulness of, I've kind of gone off track. How do I get back? How do I remind myself? Where can I build in reminders in my life about how to get back on track? And, I find even just coming to a class like this, it's just, we kind of remind each other because we have a common purpose tonight to explore these ideals. I find images like seeing a Buddha, and I have images at home, can help me. When I start getting slack with meditation, sometimes I just bow to the place where I meditate. Just kind of these little signposts. That's a mindfulness reminder. I just find really helpful. And of course we can bring mindfulness to these other factors, and mindfulness to where we're going with our energy, our faith, our concentration. That's what meditation is. It is a combination of attempting to focus and slipping off and recollecting and coming back. So that's what we just did with the mindfulness of breathing. And it gradually builds up a momentum. And I'm sure people found that, no matter how long you've been practicing, that, bit by bit, it just starts tipping you, more in the direction of not going off track so much. And just see if there's anything else I want to say. It helps us. Mindfulness is also, in the Buddha's original teaching, he said it's the direct path to realization. Mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, it can seem so straightforward, really, very hard to do, but the whole idea of paying attention, I get that. But he said, the more we pay attention, the more we recollect and come back, we build up this momentum that is a direct path to realization. But he also said it's the answer to grief, sorrow, and lamentation, which I just find, true. When I get caught up in suffering and get very narrow, it's almost counterintuitive, but I just come back to what the Buddha said. Well, just come back to, what's going on in my body? Where am I? What am I looking at? What am I hearing? What's going on in the present moment? And bring the space around it, and really helps to open it up. So those are a few things I wanted to say about mindfulness, and I just thought it'd be really nice to have a conversation with Tasha, because I know you've had some thoughts about breathing spaces and things like that.
It's like a big subject, mindfulness, although you were saying it's kind of everywhere. It's also very simple, but there's also a lot to say about it. I particularly liked you saying that one translation of it is recollecting and coming back to, just coming back to our experience and coming back to things. And when Amarapuspa and I were talking about preparing for this, I was just thinking, mindfulness has been really, really foundational and really important for me in my Buddhist practice, my meditation practice in my life. And one of the things that's going on with me is that, I've got a lot of grief. Both my parents have died, and a while ago now, anyway, that's a long story, but with my siblings and I scattering their ashes this weekend, and so there's been a lot of grief and big emotions coming up around that for me, and just doing things with my family as well. But when I can remember to be mindful, so do a kind of a few minutes breathing space, just come back into my body and feel how I am, that gives me some space from the emotions so that I'm actually able to be with them rather than just be in them. And I think that's so helpful. I found that so helpful for really big emotional responses. And it does sound really counterintuitive, but like by coming into the kind of feeling of something, and the more you meditate and the more you practice doing that, I found the more I'm able to have a kindly awareness to be with myself and hold myself in feeling those really big things rather than just being swept up in them. And yeah, that feels really important. And I think mindfulness is just so useful for self-awareness of all of those other kinds of things, you know, being able to kind of notice the patterns that our minds, the kind of grooves that our minds slip into that are not so helpful for us. But at the same time, the world we live in is really trying to push us in the opposite direction all the time. You know, I think the worst thing for me is with my mobile phone. I love going on retreat because I just switch my phone off and I know that I'm going to do that and not use it. But I just can find myself getting really stuck into scrolling and looking at notifications and filling my moments with stuff so that I'm not feeling what's going on in my experience, which is often difficult.
So yeah, it's really interesting what you said about, because you know the Buddha's original teaching talked about areas of being mindful of, and so you just talked about just bringing mindfulness to what's going on in your mind, and then when you're getting off track, is that, you know, maybe that's where you might practice one of those 4 efforts that we talked about last week. You know, maybe, you know, what conditions might you put in place if you notice yourself going, you know, off into a negative spin?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's mostly being kind to myself, really. Like the times I find myself doing that are like when I'm at work and I'm thinking and focusing quite hard and I just want a break, and so I'm just like, I'll just look at Twitter for a little bit, which doesn't do anything very good for my brain, but I feel like I've rewarded myself in some way. Or, you know, if there are things I'm feeling and I don't want to be feeling them. So yeah, I guess just bringing kind of kindness to myself where that, and trying to cultivate mindfulness that it's actually happening, so that I can notice those cycles and things.
And do you have to remind yourself to be kind to yourself?
Yeah. Definitely.
I mean, do you have little things you might put up on the fridge or anything? You think, you know, maybe I mean, I'm very visual, but, you know, sometimes people find mantras might help, or maybe a sound like a wind chime, you know, something to, you know, do you think that might be helpful?
Yeah, I don't know. I find like I've gone through phases of putting up notes for myself, but I find that after they've been up for a while, I just don't read them. They just become like part of the landscape. But I think I do things like, I try and do things to be kind to myself that I know are good for me and that I like. So I have a daily meditation practice and a yoga practice, and I try and like keep flowers on my shrine and take care when I'm cooking for myself. And it's like more of a kind of attitude I try and cultivate in the way that I do things, I think, for me.
So it sounds like you've thought of conditions you can put in place. What, like if it's like a new habit, so you don't even have to think about it. You know you're going to do yoga. You know you're going to, and so that help you cultivate positive mental states.
Definitely, And I like to do it at the start of the day, ideally, because it just sets me up for the day. And I'll notice when I'm doing those practices if there's something going on, if there's something kind of wrong with me, if I'm not feeling great for whatever reason.
Do you have anything visual where you meditate that might help you meditate?
Oh yeah, I mean I have a shrine that's not, my Buddha is not as fancy as this, but I have a shrine where I meditate, and I have shrine flowers on the shrine, and you know I burn candles, sometimes I burn incense, and have a singing bowl, and there are things I do to kind of frame it so that the space is one of meditation.
What about incense? Some people really enjoy, you know, it's like these, it's kind of like we're addressing the senses, but in a more refined way, you know, coming back to the senses.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. Sometimes I can get a bit, I just don't, it just becomes a bit too much. I found actually in the heat it's put me off using incense a little bit, because there's something about having a really hot room that's then also smoky that is maybe not so pleasant.
It's not for everyone, but I think, it's just really interesting in the Buddhist tradition how there's like this correlation with our physical senses, and just trying to refine them spiritually, so maybe flowers or flower fragrance, something visual that kind of uplifts you, maybe a sound like mantra or bells, and it's in some and sometimes there are even offering bowls that represent the different senses, like bowls with water or food. I was talking to this gentleman here about the Thai temple, where there's food offerings, so again it's bringing in the senses, but in a more refined way, something that we do in our everyday, but that we're bringing into a more refined level. And do you think that helps you become more mindful and you address the senses that way?
Yeah, definitely. I think if there are pleasing things going on in your experience, it's also nicer to be with them, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's and it's similar with meditation. It's easier to get concentrated when you notice the pleasant things happening in your experience, and then kind of stay with them.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? But maybe we'll do that in the more general discussion. But thanks, Tasha. Thanks.
Great. So I hope you enjoyed that Dharma talk. So if you did enjoy it, if you're enjoying our videos, I just want to ask you or encourage you to think about making a donation to the Brixton Buddhist Community. We're a UK charity that relies completely on your donations to run everything here. And if this was a meditation class, there'd be a donation bowl that you could just put in £10 at the end of the night to help support the activities. But as you're watching this online, I just want to ask you to think about making an online donation. If you've watched 4 or 5 videos this month, maybe you might want to think about giving £10. So there's a link in the description below where you can go to our website and make a donation. And if you want to keep giving, you don't want to worry about making that donation every month, well, you could just set up a monthly standing order. That would be really, really helpful. I want to suggest something of the region of maybe £10 or £20 a month if you're able to do that, and that would be really, really helpful and help us keep producing videos like this one. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.